I think a lot of people's impulse is to grab on and hold tight and say, no, I'm going to end up where I want to be and whatnot. But it's okay if you don't, because it's going to be somewhere beautiful. As long as you have confidence in yourself, know who you are and what you want, right? And then surround yourself with people who inspire you and you can support and they can support you to get there.
Welcome to Tune In, Discovering Your Authentic Self. Today, I have the pleasure of having Emily Aslin here as a guest. Emily is a young dancer in New York and choreographer, and what else?
Pilates instructor as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that'll be
Cover
fun.
that one.
I have that too, so we can share.
Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, we can share
absolutely.
about that. That's fantastic. So, I want to give a little background on how I know Emily. So, when our family first moved to Seattle, we were trying to plug Isabella into a dance studio, and we did not have any contacts in there in the Seattle area. We were in Maple Valley, Washington, and I had tried to reach out to a bunch of dance studios, and I found one that was going to be near our house, but I couldn't actually like nobody would call me back at first, and I just didn't have any information. So I went there on I think it was a Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, and they were there auditioning for a ballet company. And I was just standing there, like reading the things on the wall. And then in walks this beautiful young 16-year-old girl. And I just was like, hey, I'm just going to ask her. I don't know if she knows anything. So I was like, hey, we just moved here, trying to get my daughter plugged into dance. Can you give me any information? And she was a dancer at that studio, but then she was also a dancer in the ballet company. So she gave me the information about the ballet company, and she's like, "Hey, just have her come out next weekend." And we already had auditions, but just have her come out and meet. So, and that was it. And so for the next 2 years that we lived in Maple Valley, Isabella danced for Dance Expressions and also for Ensemble Ballet Theatre ballet company, and it was such a blessing. And Emily, she was so well spoken. She was so mature, so confident. And like, I was just, how is this 16-year-old girl being able to have this conversation with an adult? And it was, I just will never forget that moment of meeting you in there. And then fast forward, so that was 2016. So fast forward 9 years later, are you 25?
Oh, I am.
25.
Mhm.
And here she is. So I'd love to introduce Emily and have her tell you a little bit about her background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. And that is just the best memory, the best way to start this off, because I too remember that day so vividly. And it really warms my heart. So thank you for telling that again. I absolutely love that story. And meeting Isabella was such an amazing experience for me, bringing her into EBT, into dance expressions. I feel honored to think now that I had that kind of impact on you and your family, because I think in that moment in time I didn't realize the magnitude of that small conversation we had and then what happened afterward, but obviously it had a huge impact. So thank
And
you.
her feeling comfortable, like knowing that you were the plug to get her in there. Like she
Yeah.
always looked up to you and like watching you dance. I mean, you're an amazingly beautiful dancer. And I just remember like after the shows, and I know she felt very warm and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely love that memory. Yeah, so I grew up in Washington State in Maple Valley for a short period of time, and my family moved into the city of Seattle while I was in high school. But I continued to dance in Maple Valley until I graduated from high school. So I always had that connection to Maple Valley outside of the city the whole time while growing up. But um, my parents split when I was 8 years old. And so I did move around quite a bit for that reason. Like my dad had several homes throughout the Seattle area, and my mom moved around a couple of times. But eventually we landed in Maple Valley for a short time and then in Seattle for my last few years of high school. Um, so we had a little bit of a mixed family because my mom remarried as well when I was 12. I have three stepsisters and one biological brother and my stepfather, and then I have my dad on his side too. So definitely a mixed bag and a little bit of well, quite a lot actually of movement in my life while growing up, like literally, physically, and then with family things and all else. But yeah, moved into the city when I was in high school, but continued to dance, and dance has actually been a huge anchor for me and something that I didn't really appreciate until now, where I am in my life reflecting back on it. It served as an anchor for me throughout
Mhm.
all of that instability and that movement, right? I went to school in public school for a long while before going to private school when I was in the city of Seattle. So I went to a private high school as well, which was very academically driven. Um, and my dream for a long time was actually not dance at all. Dance was just there for me, and I danced because that's what stuck, right, from when I was young. Your parents do that thing where they throw you into all of the sports and then they see what sticks, and then dance for me was it. That was it since I was 5 years old onwards. That was all. But for a long time, I had a dream of going into politics, actually, and working in government and working in international relations. So throughout all of high school, I was really devoted to my academics, and my goal was to go to an Ivy League school and then to work at the UN eventually and be a diplomat, essentially, right? Um, and also, connections that I see now growing up, I sort of assumed this role as peacemaker and diplomat in all aspects of my life. So, kind of a learned skill, and from verbal feedback from people, you're really good. You're so diplomatic. You're such a good conversationalist. Like you're really good at keeping the peace. And so I learned that for myself, and I think part of that feedback developed into this goal of mine, right, to go into politics. Eventually, I didn't get into an Ivy League school, but I made it to the East Coast to Boston University, where I spent a year in Boston, um, going for international relations and politics. And I was dancing very little. And during that period of time, I really realized that something was missing for me. And when I reflected on it, I realized that it was dance. It was a huge hole in my life. And I made the jump the next year to move to New York. I auditioned for Alvin Ailey, American Dance Theater, the school, not the company, the school at that point. And I got in. It's an amazing program, and they offer a BFA in dance. So I studied to get my BFA through Ailey and in partnership with Fordham University. So I did that and then graduated, and I've been dancing in the city ever since. Yeah. That's kind of the short-ish version. There's a lot in there, but that's the short-ish version.
Yeah. So moving across country, how was
Yeah.
that? Tell me about that. Was that difficult?
In my head, I always knew that I wanted to make it to the East Coast. My
Okay.
mom's family is originally from here. She was born in New Jersey. So I had made it a couple times to Jersey and into New York City, I think once, maybe. But I knew I wanted to be on the East Coast. I didn't really want to stay in Seattle. I love Seattle, love the city, but I sort of knew I wanted to make that leap. That leap itself and moving all the way across the country wasn't especially challenging for me, in part because I just had this conviction that I wanted to do it.
Hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You know,
I like setting a goal and just going with it. And are you the type of person that sets the goal and you get there and then after you're there, you kind of reflect on like what things might be coming up emotionally for you? And it's just that's secondary to actually getting there.
yeah, a little bit. And I think I was that way a lot more. I
Hmm.
think that's something that I've grown into now. When I set goals for myself, I try to be more holistic about the process.
Right. Right.
But when I was young and growing up, I was super ambitious, like
Yeah.
driven by this academic dream and incredibly type A in this sense, like in a perfectionist sense, right? If I don't get into an Ivy League school, it's the end of the world, and I'm not going to be able to work at the UN and da 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 da,
Mm.
total catastrophizing mindset because
Yeah.
of that. But these days, I think I'm a lot more holistic in my goal setting and decision making for myself.
So is there a process or are there things that you did in order to change that?
Quite. quite a few things. Yeah, quite a few things. I think part of returning to dance
Mhm.
definitely helped me with that. Um, Before we started recording this, you and I were just chatting a little bit, and I was saying how healing dance can be and how it can calm the nervous system. It's a form of therapy. And I think for me, when I had the absence of that for a year in Boston, I fully realized, oh, this is something that I need in my life, right? So in that way, returning back to dance, it calmed me in this way. I had a very long period of self-reflection. I had been in therapy for a little while and realized that I didn't fully understand what I wanted and who I was and what direction I wanted to go in, right? And so upon that reflection for me, choosing dance was kind of returning to this part of myself, part of this emotional part of myself,
Yeah.
rather than this ambitious
Right.
part of myself that got very distracted by noise around me.
And not really knowing, like there probably wasn't a why. You didn't have a strong enough why that you wanted to do the international relations and working in
Mhm.
the UN and things like that. People told you you'd be good at it, but the why wasn't enough of a tug.
Yeah, I think that's true in part because I think I did have a very strong why in the sense that I wanted to make change
Hmm.
in the world,
Hmm.
like for
Hmm.
peace. I was very much like I wouldn't call myself necessarily an activist in high school, but I was very committed to several social causes, and my mom raised me to be very much a person for others, and to think about others in the world and how we can make the world better for everyone. So I think I don't know necessarily if the why wasn't a strong enough pull. I think I narrowed my mind into thinking that was the only way to achieve my why.
That wasn't the vehicle. That wasn't the right vehicle
Exactly.
in alignment with who you are as a person because
Yes.
of yeah. So you're able to achieve that same thing, but with it in a different vehicle being dance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And yeah, dance and the arts in general. Um, and I think in part, it's interesting because I'm reflecting back now. When I was growing up, I didn't even consider the arts as a viable job,
Mm,
right? I didn't think about that being a means to make a living and where I could make a living and affect change, right? I just didn't have that in my mind's eye, right?
yeah.
Because with EBT, after you graduate high school, it was sort of like, okay, most people stop dancing. Most people go off into other careers. Dance was very much a recreational hobby for them, which is incredibly valuable. And I encourage that in a lot of ways for people. But um, it wasn't until I started dancing at Spectrum Dance Theater during my last year of high school, where I found a mentor of mine named Jacqueline, who I just spoke to today and caught up with on the phone. Absolutely adore her. She was really the first person to tell me that I could be a professional dancer,
Yeah.
right? That this was an option for me. I had already applied to schools in my senior year, and I remember meeting with her one day, and she said, "Okay, so what schools did you apply to?" And I rattled off all of the universities I applied to on the East Coast, da da da. And she was like, "No, I mean dance programs. Where'd you audition?" And I just looked at her with this blank stare. It's like, what are you talking about? And she said, "You're not applying anywhere for dance. What do you mean?" So I didn't have this conversation until it was a little bit too late during that last year. And it really wasn't too late, of course,
Right. Right.
because, I chatted with her about it and I sort of had this moment of epiphany where I was like, "Oh my God, like of course you're doing this and you're dancing at Spectrum and you're making a living. Of course I can too."
Right.
Right? But I had such a narrow tunnel vision idea of what I could do with my life that if it wasn't for Jacqueline, this amazing, beautiful role model for me, like I don't know where I would be today. So that was huge.
Yeah, I could see that being like a synchronistic like meeting, much like yours and mine.
Yeah.
I think as children are growing up, high school, thinking about what they want to do for college, a lot of it can can be affected by the parents, right? And like the mindset and the beliefs that the parent has that trickles down to the child. So if a mom and dad believes that college is a must, then
Mhm.
that's the mindset that that child has. And then sometimes, you always hear this, I'm sure, the arts, making a living in the arts is challenging, right? Is that it's hard work and not everybody makes it. And so it's already this defeatist attitude that you hear. And, but then, but there is something within you clearly that wasn't willing to accept that and just kept following, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I think that it looks very scary from the outside. It does. And it's not very common. There aren't a lot. I mean, it's becoming more common now, I think. And of course, I can see it in the mindset of parents. You want your child to be able to support themselves and have a career that's sustainable. So looking at this, at your child going into the arts, it's terrifying, right? I'm very lucky in that my parents were supportive of me doing everything, right? Very supportive of me doing everything. And um, I remember having this conversation with my mom on the phone while I was in Boston, and I was talking to her about potentially wanting to transfer. And for me, it was still incredibly important that I go somewhere that where I could do a BFA program, right? Where I could go to university and everything else. Um, and I remember having this conversation and she was very supportive. She was like, Em, I believe that you can do what you want to do. You absolutely can. And if this is what you want to do, I trust you. You should go for it.
Wow. Well,
Right?
I love
So
your mom. Tell her hi, by the way.
I will. I
That's
will.
that's such an amazing, that must feel so great as a daughter to hear that from your parent, to know that you
Mhm.
don't have to prove anything to her. You don't have to follow a path that she or your dad or anyone else wants you to follow, and that you could actually, that trust that you hear in that and that you feel must feel amazing.
Yeah. It really is amazing and it is a privilege to have that. And I know a lot of people don't have that same kind of support for their parent from their parents. So it can be very challenging. And of course I understand that, But I do think when it comes to the arts, I think that if you don't have a role model or people around you to show you that this is an option, I think it's hard to imagine that for
Yep.
yourself, right? Or if you don't have that inspiration in general, for anyone in any field, if they don't have that inspiration around them, it's hard to visualize yourself doing it. So I think there's huge value in that.
Yeah, and then people wake up, I mean, a little younger than I, but like 30s, 40s, and they're completely unfulfilled in their life because they made a choice, whether it's a partner, whether it's a job, whether it's a place to live, not properly vetting what was the right thing for them, and especially with the career. I mean, you hear people say, and it's okay to have multiple careers. There's no right or wrong to that. But a lot of people get into things because they're good at it. Like I remember I was a math major when I went to Boston College because I was
Mhm.
really good at math. But what am I going to do with that?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, that's not some, just because I'm good at it doesn't mean I should be doing that. And I do feel like I felt some pressure about that. Not, it was implied pressure. It wasn't like specific pressure, like you should do something with that, but
Yeah.
very academically driven too. Went to an all girls Catholic school,
Yeah.
same thing.
Mhm.
But I do have a creative side to me. I do have an, not necessarily art side to me, but a creative side to me that I used to roller skate downstairs in my basement when I was like 8, 9, 10, and just would do it over. And I would choreograph all of these dance, roller skating dance things. But like,
Uh,
I never had the confidence to
yeah.
go out and figure out what to do with it. And so now in my 50s, late 40s, 50s, I'm finally like soothing that side of me and bringing that out into the world.
Yeah.
But I think a child, and that's what I wanted to ask you about as kind of the last part of the interview, is what advice would you give a it doesn't necessarily have to be a girl, but a child, like an older child, teenage years, young adult,
Mhm.
that wants to follow their passion, but maybe is afraid to, or doesn't have the support in their family, or doesn't have that belief in themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that lack of confidence is huge, and I think it's more common than we think as individuals.
Mhm.
When I reflect back on being young as well, I was not confident in myself at all. I did not have that confidence, and not in myself just in general, but as a dancer for the longest time. You met me at a time when I you met me at a time when I was in a very considerable period of growth, I think. And
Mhm.
I was starting to audition and get these roles that were bigger than I had ever gotten before, right? I was never the best dancer in the room growing up. Never. I just didn't I love to perform, and when I was on stage, I sort of had that confidence that came out because that was inside, right? But just in the way that I moved through the world, I was a pretty quiet kid. I was a pretty quiet child. So I think that that internal that confidence, it comes in part from believing in your intrinsic worth, right? Like no matter what you do, what you put out in the world, just you as a human being in the world have worth. And that's really hard to say yes to, right? And say like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Me being here right now, I have worth for sure. But it comes from a lot of practice, right? So I think in terms of advice that I would give to younger people growing up, and especially young women, I think there's a few things. First, I would say be curious, and I think it's okay to have more questions than answers,
I love
because especially remember growing up, I would have a lot of questions, and I wouldn't necessarily know the answers to them all the time, but I would be afraid to ask
that.
because, oh, what if I look stupid? What if my people won't think I'm as intelligent as I am, da 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 da. That's okay. Everybody has questions, but being curious, that's how you're going to discover more about yourself. And that's how you're going to discover more about other people as well. It's a beautiful thing because I think having community is incredibly important too. So that's how you're going to build that for yourself. In part is through curiosity, and in part is also through asking for help, right? That goes
Uh,
hand in hand with being curious. Yeah. So I think those two things are huge. And then I think I was reflecting on this too because um this confidence thing, when you had sent me this question beforehand, I was thinking about it and pondering it, and I was thinking about not thinking yourself small, because I find whenever I feel insecure, I have this visual of me being very small, when in reality, that's not the case. My energy and myself as a person, I radiate energy. Everybody does, right? But internally, if I have this sensation of feeling small and lacking confidence, then it can become a cycle. So I think don't think yourself small, be curious, and don't be afraid to ask for help, because people want to help you and people want to connect with you in general, right? No matter how old you are.
yeah, I love that. And I think like the curious part, I think a lot of people are afraid to, I'm going to say the word fail, but
Mm.
you can only fail, like you can only, everyone's a beginner. I mean, you were a beginner at one time. You didn't become an amazing, beautiful dancer in one day, in one year. It's a process. And I think a lot of people, if they don't, and it's gotten, I feel like it's gotten a little bit even more so with um the way that the world is right now. But if you have to learn how to be humble, ask the questions like you said, and it's okay to be a beginner. You're not going to you're going to suck at first. And a
Yeah.
lot of people just give up on their dream because they don't get there in the time period that they think that they should get there.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. Um, One thing I remember my mom would always tell me, and she still to this day would tell me, but every time I would go audition, right, and I would feel so nervous, like auditioning in ensemble ballet theater context, right? So I would audition for these roles and I would really want to get them. And, I'd be so, so, so nervous and feel terrible. And my mom would say, take a deep breath and think about what's the worst thing that can happen. Will the world stop spinning? No. The world's going to keep spinning. You're going to keep going. You're going to keep dancing. So that visualization that helped me a lot growing up, absolutely. And I also think I've learned now that failure isn't so much that negative big, scary monster that we think it is growing up, but it's really redirection.
Totally.
And yeah, for me, not getting into an Ivy League school, I got waitlisted at Princeton University, which was my like that was my top. I wanted to go there, right? But I got waitlisted and it felt like the world was falling down around my ears. That was the first time I can really vividly remember failing, right, in my mind. And I've talked to other people about this since, and they're like, what do you mean? You just didn't get into the school. Who cares? Like, you're where you are now. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be where I am today dancing, freelancing in New York, and choreographing. I just started my own company as well, and I'm going to be producing new shows and everything else. Like, I wouldn't be doing all of this stuff right now if I hadn't
Right.
gotten wasted at Princeton. So, I think about these things and they're even the smallest things. I'm like, oh man, I didn't do that. I didn't get that. I whatever. No, it redirects me into exactly where I should be right now.
Yep. I live like that too. And I believe that. And I feel like all of these things happen, they say it happens for a reason. I don't necessarily believe that's not a mantra that I live by. I do believe in that it's an opportunity. I said anything can be an opportunity, but
Yeah.
it does take a strong mindset to have that and to follow through because I think most people, not most, but a lot of people would go into the victim mindset and it didn't work out for me and then not have the intention to be able to get out of it and find the opportunity in the failure or the rejection, whatever it is. It does take a mindset, but then you can lean on that trust muscle once you get to the next side of it and you're like, okay, like now the rejection from Princeton was actually an opportunity for you. So next time you have a rejection or whatever it is, you know that there's an opportunity and you're going to go to that opportunity and it's going to be something that's more in alignment with who you are as a person.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And I have agency in that way, right? You have agency
Yeah.
in that. We all do. It's exactly right. Because if I was, I had been rejected from Princeton, and then what did I do? I went to an amazing school for a year. And then after that, I decided, okay, that's not for me. I applied to a different school and got in, and now I'm pursuing my dream, right? The training at Alvin Ailey is incredible, right? I have imagined me as, a 12-year-old kid dancing with EBT that I would train at like the second most like high level, whatever you want to say, number two ranked dance school in the country. No, I would never have dreamed of that, right? So reflecting back on these things, I think it's really true what people say that you never know where you're going to end up.
Mhm.
And that to me, I think is incredibly encouraging, right? It sounds scary and uncertain. And I think a lot of people's impulse is to grab on and hold tight and say, no, I'm going to end up where I want to be and whatnot. But it's okay if you don't, because it's going to be somewhere beautiful. As long as have confidence in yourself, know who you are and what you want, right? And then surround yourself with people who inspire you and you can support and they can support you to get there.
Yeah.
That's
That's
absolutely.
beautiful. So beautiful. Wow. What an awesome conversation. And I'm so proud of you. And next time I am in New York, I hope that we can get together and can
Yes.
come watch some of your dance. And so are you a mentor a little bit now? Do you have people that you mentor?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do some teaching around the city when I can as well. I was teaching a little bit last year going into some New York City public schools and teaching some kids dance too, which is also amazing. I'm not doing that so much this year. I don't have as much time, but yeah, absolutely. I'm doing a little bit of mentoring and anybody who I can pass advice on to or who wants to ask me questions, I welcome it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah,
I look forward to following you and meeting up with you sometime soon.
yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.